all. Apologies for the slight glitch with our sound there, but hopefully you can all hear me now successfully. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be working behind the scenes to produce our conversation today. Before we get started, I wanted to encourage you to follow us on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we will be sure to reshare. We encourage you to share any thoughts, questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, welcome to all. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be working behind the scenes. I do want to take just a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and our programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. I also want to give special thank you to our LEO sustaining sponsors that make it possible for us to have these weekly learning and engagement opportunities every Tuesday. Thank you so much for your support. Before we jump in, I just want to share a few housekeeping details with all of you. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, and thank you to those who have done so already. If you haven't, feel free to use the chat box to share your name, your city or state, and your organization. When sending out those chat messages, be sure to select everyone so that we all can see each other's messages. And feel free to share your thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to those questions, and our panelists will be typing out answers as we go through the conversation. I did also just want to give a quick flag, as I have gotten a message. Apologies for the title error at the top of this slide. We promise you're in the right conversation. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as all slides, bios, and resources, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered for the conversation. And lastly, we will be posting a brief on-screen poll during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And finally, before we jump in, I just wanted to call your attention to some of our upcoming webinars. Next week on October 21st, we hope you'll join us for our third session in our Parents as Curators of Their Children's Education series, where we will learn from leaders about why they chose homeschooling and how they are supporting other families to learn more about it and whether it's a good fit for their family. The next week on the 28th, we'll have an engaging webinar on early relational health and how it fuels early learning success for its students. And in November, we will be kicking off with a Crucible of Practice Salon with this conversation looking at the Reading Captains program that will take place at 12:30. More information and registration links for all of these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope that you can join us. And joining you now is Sarah Torian, Chief Engagement Officer with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks so much, Sierra. And on behalf of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Children and Screens Institute of Digital Media and Child Development, I am delighted to welcome all of you to today's conversation. In this session, we'll take a look at questions around how, if, and when to use digital media with very young children in ways that supports their healthy development and well-being during the first 5 years. A period that we know is a period of rapid development that is foundational for later cognitive, social, and physical development, as well as behavioral health. We'll hear some of the big do's and don'ts of digital media in early childhood, drawing on evidence and insights from child development, education, and family systems research. And to help us gain a clearer understanding of how to preserve childhood in a digital age while supporting healthy early development, we have an incredible panel of experts with us today. I'm delighted to welcome and introduce each of them, but sharing just very brief bios for each, so I'd encourage everyone to check out the longer bios that are linked in the chat. Welcome first to Rachel Barr. And if we could move the slides forward, sorry. Yes, there we go. Welcome first to Rachel Barr. Rachel is professor of psychology at Georgetown University, director of Georgetown Early Learning Project, and author of the 2024 book, Early Childhood and Digital Media. Welcome also to Dr. Dimitri Christakis. Dimitri is Chief Science Officer at Children and Screens, Chief Health Officer at Special Olympics International, the George Atkins Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Washington, and Editor-in-Chief at JAMA Pediatrics. Dimitri's laboratory focuses on the effects of early environmental influences on child health and development. Welcome also to Rachel Franz. Rachel is the Young Children Thrive Offline Program Director at the nonprofit Fair Play, which works to eliminate the exploitative and harmful business practices of marketers and big tech. Delighted to welcome Kathy Hirsch-Pasek back to GLR Learning Tuesdays. Kathy is a professor of psychology at Temple University and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Kathy is known for her translational work designed to bridge basic science and educational impact. Welcome back again to Michelle King. Michelle serves as the Chief Executive Officer for the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC, a global association dedicated to high-quality early learning for all children. And to guide us through today's conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Chris Perry. Chris is the Executive Director of Children and Screens, Institute of Digital Media and Child Development, an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to helping children thrive in a digital world. Thank you, Chris, so much for joining us to co-sponsor this session and also to guide us through the conversation. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of our partners at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. It's an honor to moderate this conversation today and a true privilege to be joined by such an excellent panel of experts. Children and Screens has spent over a decade studying how technology shapes childhood and translating research into accessible resources for parents, educators, clinicians, policymakers, and community leaders. Our mission is to equip adults with knowledge they need to make informed decisions in an increasingly digital world to ensure that children don't just grow, but thrive. All of our resources are available completely free to the public, and the latest of these is the Children and Screens Guide for Early Child Development and Media Use, Infants and Children ages 0 to 5, released just last week. This comprehensive resource for parents of infants and young children summarizes insights from the latest research and experts, some of whom we have here with us today, to help families make better choices about screen time from infancy through preschool, to build a foundation of healthy brain, neural, and social development. Read the guide today to find practical tips for daily routines around sleep, play, conversation, and media use, do's and don'ts for healthy boundaries and common pitfalls, how to choose quality content for preschoolers to support learning and connection, and guidance on balancing screen time with essential offline experiences. Today, we're going to zoom out a little bit to talk more broadly about the research and what it tells us about screen use in the early years, how this research reflects the real-world context surrounding early childhood development, and where all of this is going with ever-advancing technologies. We're going to start with a brief foray into what the research can tell us and what we are still learning about screens in the early years and the impacts of both early use and exposure to screens starting from birth through age 5. We don't have time today to get into all of the rich details, but we're joined by 3 of the foremost experts in the field, Dimitri Christakis, Rachel Barr, and Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, to share what they know about the most current research. So Dimitri, we're going to start with you. Based on the most recent research, how does early and frequent screen exposure affect young children's development? And we're talking about birth to 5 years old today. And if there are any differences about those kids, say, than children that might be older.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so let's start by saying that 0 to 5, as anyone that's been a parent knows, it covers a pretty broad developmental arc. And I think we have to segment it a little bit more before we can make sort of any recommendations. I think consistently research has found that there are really no demonstrable benefits to screen use before the age of 18 months. And in fact, very strong suggestions that there's harm associated with early screen use with children that young. The harm comes both because the screens themselves can be overstimulating to developing brains, and equally and perhaps more importantly, because use of screens in children that young, particularly in the absence of any benefits, takes away from, displaces other essential activities that young children and their developing brains need in order to thrive. I think when you get to older children, in the age, let's say, of 2 to 5, there, the good news for parents is that it's really kind of the sweet spot of media research. Thanks to groundbreaking work that was done, um, actually, from when I was a child. I absolutely played no role in it, but there was a children's television workshop, and there was a really strong bipartisan political interest in developing high quality, publicly funded programs to promote learning during early childhood. And those created shows that most of us remember, regardless of our age. Sesame Street, The Electric Company. Those were really well-designed shows that were conceived of with the help of psychologists, child development experts, and they were actually studied to make sure that children were learning the things that they should learn from them. Thankfully, even though those shows are still available. I should add Fred Rogers, by the way. I forgot Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is one of my favorites, and I watched that with my kids as well. Um, there are other more recent high quality programs that promote both cognitive development and, equally important, social emotional development. Children imitate what they see on screen, good and bad, really at all ages. But for young children in particular, the good news is not only can they learn letters and numbers from high quality educational programming when they're 2 to 5 years of age, but they can learn pro-social behaviors. They can learn to be more tolerant, more accepting, more inclusive. Um, so that's really good, and something that parents can feel good about, especially if they find those high quality shows. And I might add, make a point of watching them with their children. I want to add one caveat though, because there can still be too much of a good thing. Um, and even though there is quality programming at for that age, I think there still needs to be some limits to how much time children spend, because there's so many other important things for children to do, from interacting with peers in real time, playing with caregivers, reading with an adult, and of course, physical play as well. So I'll stop there.
I really appreciate you breaking down those first 5 years into smaller segments, because we know how rapidly the brain's developing and how critical those years are. Are there any other factors that make a difference in whether digital media use supports or hinders early development? And is there healthy technology?
Well, I mean, technology, particularly in these times, encompasses a broader and broader group of platforms and devices. I think the most important thing is in defining what's healthy is seeing to what extent it supports children's development and their early learning. I often say to parents that the best way for you to decide if some technology is good for your children is, first, it should be very obvious to you what it's trying to teach. The best programming, the best programs, the best apps have a curriculum behind them. They have a set of learning objectives, and it should be obvious to you, even if it's not obvious to your 3-year-old, what they're trying to teach. And then the next question is it working for your child? Are they learning the lessons that are being conveyed? So in the days of Sesame Street, when the show was brought to you by the letter A, it's pretty clear what the learning objective was. And after the show, let's see if your child is learning about the letter A, if they've learned more, and reinforce that learning in the real world.
We have 1 minute left, Dimitri, and there was a question from Sarah in the audience about whether or not the fact that parents often seem to be addicted to their phones or their screens is a problem, and do we need to be addressing that as well?
I really appreciate that question. It's spot on, and I should have mentioned it. I didn't have enough time to. That's absolutely right. The early child media ecosystem includes what some people call technoference, and the fact that parents are on their devices, um, putatively multitasking, which is to say, on their phone and simultaneously trying to be present for their toddler or their preschooler, and that doesn't work. It deprives the child of the attention they need, um, and frankly, is probably not very efficient as a parent trying to do work and be with your child at the same time. I often say that young children need laps, not apps, and it's really true. There's no substitute for real human interaction.
Yeah, that's
Thank
for
you for
sure.
this question.
Thanks for your answers. Kathy, I'm going to turn to you because I know how much you've thought about some of the points that Dimitri just made when it comes to families and educators and the responsibility that they have to determine the quality of educational apps and all of the other content that's coming through their devices, and that they're trying to decide whether or not that's the right or wrong thing to share with their child. And that can change rapidly with their age. Tell us a little bit about your work in this area and how you've broken that down.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Dimitri because he said so many of the wonderful things that I would have said. So now I don't have to say them. But I think even something that has a really clear learning goal can be a not so good app. And a couple of years ago, with the well-known Jenny Radetzky and one of her students, we did a study of the 100 most downloaded apps. And we found out, well, I should let everybody out there guess how many of those 100 most downloaded apps, and they were called educational apps, how many of them had real educational value, even though they had a learning goal? Well, I'll give you the answer. It was 2. So the question is, what were we looking for? What do scientists look for when they look for something that is a good educational app? What has to have a learning goal for sure? But it should also require that the kid be active. And what I mean by that is not jumping around and throwing the phone or the iPad, but minds on, that you actually have to think about it, not just memorize it. It should be engaging rather than distracting. A lot of the programs out there, they seem to, you're learning about something about the letter C, and all of a sudden it jumps around and has some song in the middle that has nothing to do with the letter C. So it should be something that keeps you on task, active and engaging, meaningful, something the kid really could understand. It's not so foreign. It should be socially interactive. Dimitri just suggested that. Nothing can replace humans. Really, really important. And it should be joyful. And I think that's an important thing too. We don't want them to just sit down and memorize while they're looking at an app. It should be something that's a lot of fun to do. And I should also say that a lot of times these apps are joyful. Even Candy Crush is joyful, and you'll stay on it for a long time, but it doesn't get you anywhere.
Giselle has asked, what were the 2 apps, and are you able to share which ones you found that met those criteria that you
You
just
know,
laid out?
I'm really not, but what I will say is Dimitri already gave that away too, that when we had children's media companies that were literally working with scientists, I remember, meeting with the Fred Rogers crew, and I've met so many times on the advisory board of PBS to create shows for PBS Kids. And Sesame always met with people who were doing the science to figure out how to put creativity or how to put math or spatial learning into their apps. And now much of that research and discovery is gone. So we need to understand that while there are a lot of good shows out there from these companies, and I will give you a hint that those were the companies that had the better apps in the download, okay, that met the criteria. But now we're not going to have any more of these being generated because these big media companies don't have the funds to do it anymore.
All right. So one thing I know about you is that you love to research and talk about play and how
Right.
important it is and the big role it plays in early learning. But talk now about how play intersects with digital media in early childhood.
Well, play really is when it's active and engaging and meaningful, socially interactive and iterative and joyful. And when you can create an app that meets those criteria, you really are playing, and it really is exciting and engaging for young children. I think the problem is that a lot of times we've lost touch with how to really tap into how the human brain learns. And the human brain learns through play. So, all of you adults out there, I'd like to ask you when the last time you played was. When's the last time you skipped down the street or just looked for the leaves as they're falling in the autumn weather and just put them together or run through them? It's probably a long time ago. So, I don't want to take too much time except to say that if we all work together, we can create these products that are playful, that are the best learning products, and that will help all children move ahead. Good quality apps is actually what we're looking for.
All right. One last question. So we need a
Yeah.
quick answer.
You're
What
good.
about AI? Should we be using that advanced technology at home and or in early childhood education settings with our youngest children? And what do parents and educators need to know?
Okay, simple answer to that is with our youngest children, the 3 and under, the answer is an unqualified no. Every bit of data that we have about how little human brains develop is that they require human to human interaction back and forth, conversations, even if they're with burps and coos. And get ready, folks, because OpenAI has made a deal with Mattel, and this holiday season, you're going to see these toys on the market. So please stay away when you're under 3, and let's see what comes out and hope they work with scientists.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Kathy. So now I'm going to go to you, Rachel, and you've heard Dimitri and Kathy lay out a pretty strong argument for being cautious and careful with children, especially under 2 or 3 years of age, as they get a little bit older, in introducing high quality apps or digital media. Talk to us a little bit about potential benefits of screen use in early childhood, and can it be used or can it help result in positive family impacts?
Yeah, it's been so interesting so far to hear all this information, but there's a couple of places where I think I'm going to say PBS again, where we know that over a long period of time, children who were exposed to media, to Sesame Street, by the time they were 10 or 12, they were doing better in math, doing better in making friends, and this sort of continued. And they stayed on a healthy media diet. So they made better choices about media across time as well. And the other thing that I think is really important to know is that when children were from low resource homes, they were the children who benefited the most from the high quality content. So just to say again that high quality content has really long lasting positive benefits. And the second thing that we haven't talked about yet, that we're kind of engaging in here now, is video chat. And so we did a study during the pandemic when everybody was really socially isolated. And we all know from that experience, families, children, parents, and grandparents alike, that disconnection was incredibly difficult for everyone. However, video chat gave us an opportunity for connection. So we followed families and we asked them, particularly grandparents, how close they felt to their grandchildren after having connections over video chat. And what we found was that grandparents who engaged in lots of activities, things like scavenger hunts or peekaboo, or sharing their favorite meals, or making funny faces, all of these things helped grandparents during that really socially isolated time feel closer to their grandchildren. And grandparents were really creative. And the other thing about video chat that we've sort of been talking about, what is it that babies need? Babies need the back and forth. They need the communication. They need the social contingency. So if I do peekaboo, how does the baby respond? They will then try and look for you as well. So there's that contingent interaction with video chat. And we often forget about that, but it's now available on all of our phones, and can be another way that parents can use media. And there's a question here: is should there be time limits that parents and families should consider? What we found in our study was actually that it was more about the children sort of setting the limits. After that, we studied children under 2 and up to 5. And what we found is after about 15 minutes, it was more difficult for children to sort of keep the interaction going. However, they did like to talk to their grandparents every day. So frequent short bursts were really quite effective for parents of young children and the young children themselves, not to mention the grandparents who were really missing their grandbabies.
So you talked a lot about this co-viewing or doing things together. What role does joint media engagement play in shaping the benefits of screen time? And what recommendations do you have for quality co-use between children and caring adults?
So joint media engagement, what we mean by that is like sharing in the activity. And I think Kathy really put it very well. Like, how do you play? Can you engage and play around digital devices? So via video chat, they would play scavenger hunts, etc., as I mentioned. But you can also play with video games, and you can play with video shows and sing and dance. And we did a lot of studies where we looked at parents, and they were singing and dancing and talking with their babies. And when they were more likely to do that, to jointly engage, then children were much more likely to respond. They were happier. They were also dancing, and they were speaking and talking more during that video. Parents sometimes worry, well, what if I interrupt my baby while they're watching the show? Will I disrupt them? So you don't need to be talking like 100% of the time, but what helps is that helps the baby make connections. So if you have a cat on the screen and then you say, oh, that's just like our cat Moggy, then that helps the baby connect the dots. And then the second thing about joint engagement is after the show is over, you can say, okay, now we're done with the show. Let's go out and play. Let's go pretend to be Elsa, or let's go build some blocks just like they did on the show that we were just watching, or let's conduct science. Let's go play. So helping the children make the transition is much easier when you're jointly engaging and moving away from the screen as well.
I mean, that's really illustrative of the very same thing you should do if you read aloud to a child, right? There's the book itself and the story itself, but the more you can extend the story and engage the child in the story, the more likely they are to remember and be able to learn from that story. I'd like to invite Kathy and Dimitri to come back on camera so that the three of you together might answer a couple of questions from our audience. So here we go. What are the most common misconceptions you still see among parents or practitioners about digital media use in the first 5 years? Who would like to take that one?
I can start. I mean, I think, I would say that parents frequently operate on the misconception that the earlier they start their child using digital technology, the savvier they will be. And I see this with parents that take great joy in sharing with me that their child is so adept at the iPad or can manipulate apps with such alacrity. And while I don't want to take away from their child's innate genius, I'll add that there is no benefit to the early introduction of technology, and that these devices are quite intuitive and frankly designed for anybody to be able to pick up and use. But I understand parents' concerns. I mean, I think that they recognize that we're growing up in an increasingly digital world, and they've been convinced that the earlier they introduce technology, the better. I think there's no value to it at all, and they should know that.
I think
Thank you. Oh no, go ahead, Rachel, please.
I was just going to say one of the the biggest challenges, perhaps not necessarily a misconception, but Kathy alluded to it before, that many of the apps and programs are labeled by developers as educational, making it very, very difficult for parents to navigate and decide, well, what is educational or not. And one thing I wanted to add is that, there's the Children and Screens guide that just came out. There's guides from the AP. There's guides from 0 to 3. So there's sort of lots of information to help support parents in choices around media content. But one other thing that I often don't hear people remember is that we have really trained information scientists in our community right at our public libraries. And so I think probably the best place to go for parents and for teachers is to sort of go to libraries and ask children's librarians, how can I choose? What would I know would be educational? What are the different shows and what are the characters that children of different ages really enjoy? And I think that that's a huge opportunity that's available in lots of communities to help get past this misconception around everything being educational, nothing being educational, but really to help them navigate this really difficult and challenging time.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for answering, by the way, a question from our audience
Okay.
about what resources to consult when they're looking for high quality digital material. I love that the recommendation was for the libraries of all places. Of course, they're so familiar and skilled in understanding what is educational. So thank you very much. Kathy and Dimitri, do you have any other recommendations? Quickly, we're in kind of a lightning round right now.
Common sense media. I wondered if I might just, add one other piece to what Rachel was saying, which is, I think the other misconception I hear all the time is that parents are so afraid of doing anything on media or ever exposing their kids to screens. And even the American Academy of Pediatrics said for little guys, it's not a bad way to meet your grandparents if they don't live in the same city. So if you have like remote parents or remote grandparents or aunts or uncles, FaceTime actually isn't such a bad way. And in fact, has been shown to be pretty darn good. And also just to say, screens are here to stay, So I think really finding balance and making sure that you get the best quality is better than saying it's all bad or it's all good.
Do you think children can benefit from watching digital media or using apps with their peers if their caregivers aren't available? And would they still get the same benefit from that type of co-viewing?
There's data on that, and it says yes.
Great, thank you.
There was a great study where one school community could afford single tablets for all children, and another school community could only afford shared tablets. And the children, at the end of the year, they measured educational outcomes, and the children in the shared tablet schools did a lot better because of those peer interactions, and they really do learn and play with media together.
How cool. In your view, what are the biggest unanswered questions or tensions in the field? And in other words, what are we still grappling with?
I'm going to go with AI. I think this is like a super big tension. I think we literally don't know the potential of AI, nor do we know what the risks are. And I think, if I may, the biggest risk right now, as happened with apps earlier, is this rush to marketplace. When you rush to marketplace without consulting people who know how kids learn, then you run the risk of maybe getting a product out there, but not one that's healthy for children.
No, I
Dimitri or Rachel, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say the biggest challenge is really for parents sort of doing this digital balancing act. So they have the phones in their lap, was how parents had described this. And they've also got all of these work demands and all of these challenges. And so I think we really need to think about other ways to support parents as well, because there's a lot that they're actually coping with right now. And we have to be careful not to just sort of demonize just them using the phone when they're trying to balance everything that's going on.
Yeah. Before I move on to the last question, Dimitri, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I think, I share Kathy's concern about AI, and I think we should be very cautious about its introduction at all for very young children. But I will add, to me, the sweet spot is really about finding technologies or apps, let's say, that really promote healthy parent-child interaction. I'm often asked to recommend an app that's been proven to be educational, and both the panelists are right that the vast majority have never been tested. There's an exception, and I say this full disclosure, I have no financial relationship with the company at all, but there's a product called Bedtime Math, which has been tested in first grade children, a little bit older than the group we're talking about now. And Bedtime Math is basically an app that's free, and at the evening it every day, but it's intended to be at bedtime. It has a very simple story that has embedded math, and at the end it asks, do you want to do a simple, a medium, or a hard question? And when it was studied in first grade children, it was actually found that the people in a randomized controlled trial, so very robust design, the children randomized to bedtime math had better math scores than the control groups. And importantly, the kids of parents who reported being math anxious showed even greater benefits, which is not surprising because those are the parents that are probably less likely to do math with their children. But think about what that app is. That's not an app that you give to your child and you walk away and come back and expect that they have learned calculus in the 10 minutes you've been away. It's really an app that creates an opportunity for that scaffolding experience for a parent and a child to have a meaningful interaction. And I wish there were more apps like that. I wish there were more programs like that. And because I think they have the potential to offer a lot of benefit without saying that technology is universally bad.
Yeah,
Well, me
Chris,
too. And I think you've all pointed to sort of an upstream problem. We're not going to get into that today, but that the products are going to market quickly. They're being deployed to younger and younger children, not without necessarily adequate research. And that's really because their motivation might not be children thriving. They have a different motivation. So here we are trying to figure out, well, how do we make those things safe while we wait for them to get safer upstream? Different webinar. All right, so slight change in gears before we pivot to the second half of our panel. This is an audience question, and we'll come back to other audience questions at the end of the webinar if we have time. This comes from Monica. She's asking, nonverbal autistic children are given communication devices often. Do you have other ideas that could assist autistic children, both verbal and nonverbal? Or should we consider anything kind of screen time and not see that as necessarily useful?
So studies have actually been done in Sweden with children with autism and engaging around screens. And part of the thing that's kind of interesting is that children with autism do much better, again, when they're sharing the screen, when they're engaging in joint engagement. They can learn reading better. But the key is, in this case, that if the carer was sitting beside the child and they were both looking at the screen, that was a really effective and helpful setup in the studies in Sweden.
Thank you. All right, I hate to stop us. I know we could probably talk about research for the entire 90 minutes that we have, but I want to invite Michelle Kang and Rachel Franz to jump into the conversation. We're going to zoom out a bit and talk about these findings within the context of the real world of parenting policy and practice. So Michelle, how can early learning programs balance digital access innovation with play, exploration, and relationships at the heart of early learning?
Well, first, Chris, it's great to be with you. And this conversation has been fascinating. I always learn so much when I hear from the experts. So thank you to Dimitri, Chris, and Rachel for sharing. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out and thank our many NAEYC members who are joining today. I've seen a lot of familiar names who've joined in the chat. So it's been great to see a lot of familiar faces, partners and members who are critical in being able to elevate the importance of early learning and frankly are doing the work every day in early learning settings all across the country. So, to your question, Chris, our field's North Star remains the principles that are outlined in developmentally appropriate practice, which emphasizes a dynamic, relational, culturally rooted nature of children's development. It's a strengths-based, play-based approach to learning that creates a joyful and supportive environment for whole child well-being. Kathy knows this well. She talks often about how critical it is that we are centering play as we think about what is best for how children learn and how educators can foster that kind of environment. At the core of early learning environments that are centered in developmentally appropriate practice are prepared and supported educators. It's these educators that are fostering the joy. They're fostering the nuance of human connection. And we know from much of what's already been shared today, but also beyond that, from the research and the practice, that young children thrive in environments where educators are building that responsive, culturally attuned, emotionally supportive relationships. So with that as grounding, a few of the key principles that we think about when we think about technology and early learning, which are taken from the position statement that NAEYC has on technology and early learning. We first published this in partnership with the Fred Rogers Institute, and I'm happy to share that we are updating this position statement in the coming months. So stay tuned. We're going to be looking for feedback from the field and from many of our partners to help us guide and make sure that we are centering so much of the research and practice and what we have learned over the years. But that being said, the principles are still solid. It may not speak to AI, but it does speak to how critically important it is that we are thinking about technology to not replace what an educator and adult does, but that it supports children's learning environments. It's tailored to their child's age, abilities, and developmental needs, that it's intentional, integrated into curriculum activities that helps to enhance instead of replacing those learning activities and experiences. We also want to think about equity, about access to technology and digital media with awareness of the different resources and opportunities among families and communities. We want to be thinking about how we're safeguarding children's physical and emotional health. I'm so glad that we've already talked about AI and some of the concerns about what we don't know yet and how that is impacting young children. We want to assure safety and support for young children and preserving first and foremost that relationship. And then I'm thinking all the time as the professional organization for early childhood educators, how are we supporting educators to be able to have the support with the resources, the professional development on best practices so that they can benefit from the best knowledge and the supports as they go about their day of supporting the development of young children.
Thank you. You touched on the importance of protecting the essential human interactions that help young children thrive. How can the systems around early childcare and education ensure that we protect that relationship and create those critical relationships?
Well, it's been said already, and I'm going to continue to lift this up. Technology cannot be a substitute for the loving and nurturing and responsive relationship that an adult has with a child in an early learning environment. It can't. And and I do want to emphasize, because sometimes when we talk about early learning environments, certainly I might be asked, like, are you talking about centers? Are you talking about schools? I want to emphasize that quality early learning happens in all settings. It happens in centers, in schools, in homes. And in all of those environments, it starts with the adults that are creating this place of belonging and welcome for all children and families. That being said, I would be remiss if I didn't elevate that when we think about systems and settings, that one of the things that is still clearly missing overall is valuing the early educator workforce and recognizing that through the support and compensation, adequate compensation of that across systems. We want the people who are doing this work to be recognized for the critical and important work that they do. And it's been said a number of times that these are the most essential years. These are the years where children's brains are developing so rapidly. And we have not had the systems in place which adequately supports and recognizes that they are supporting the most critical and consequential time of a child's development, literally doing brain building. And, you know, I love that image. Especially when an educator says, you know, listen, I'm a brain builder, and they are. That is what they're doing. And, you know, we want these jobs, the work that they do, to be good jobs. So they're supporting child development. So I do think about technology and systems of how we can help support the educators doing the work. How can we leverage it to reduce administrative burden? How can we use it to help support some of the challenges and gaps like dual language learners? How can we help it make the work of an early childhood educator be even more impactful and supportive, and recognize some of the challenges that we have in early learning environments that could be addressed, and from a systemic way, address some of the gaps that we have in our systems.
Thank you. You've each so far touched on different aspects of this sort of early childhood ecosystem. And it's been everything from these micro interactions with parents and caregivers to peers. Now we're talking about children in early care and education settings, and then the workforce that's supporting them and the needs that they have and some of the struggles they have and how important it is to support them because they're supporting children. But Rachel, now we're going to go and we're going to touch on sort of another layer of that ecosystem, because so much of what's going on with digital technology these days and the way children are interacting with it is happening very upstream. And your work at Fair Play focuses on protecting children from the commercial and persuasive design aspects of digital media. Can you unpack how marketing messages influence parents' decisions and perceptions around media use for very young children?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And Michelle, thank you so much for all that you do and your responses that really center children in their development. That's what we're all about at Fair Play as well. You know, I think we really focus on how corporations are interfering in child development and that ability for them to be themselves, to be their whole selves in this world. And this spring, we at Fair Play polled families with children under 6 years old from across the US and Canada. And what we found is the majority of them said that they believed that screen time was essential or necessary for their child's learning and development. And this included parents of infants, right, who we've talked about before, don't need screen time. And we were concerned by that because there really isn't evidence that supports that claim, that it's necessary or better than learning with other humans. And so we started to ask, like, where does that messaging come from? So, you know, what we know about families today, right, is that they are incredibly stressed, and also that they want the very best for their children. And especially for marginalized communities, there can be an extra push to get and stay ahead. And what we found through years and years of research and meeting with different tech companies and parents and educators is that it's really the tech companies that know this, and they prey on the vulnerabilities of young children's development, and families want for their children to be successful. And so companies right now hold this really strong narrative that children need technology. And we find that narrative shows up kind of wherever parents are, right? If anyone's a parent of an infant today, for example, if you go anywhere near Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you're getting push messages about what your child needs, including the media they should watch. But one thing that I think, you know, the tech companies' business model like doesn't often show up in this discussion. And the apps and videos and hacks that parents get pushed exist in the context of capitalism and in the context often of platforms that are not designed to keep children safe. So if you spend any time watching or searching on YouTube for videos for babies, right? You get videos that sort of promise that they can learn their first words, that they can learn how to talk, they can learn the alphabet, or they can, be calm for hours and hours and hours. And parents see this and they're like, oh yeah, this is educational. And we've talked a lot about how non-educational a lot of these things are. But even when we have this high quality content like Daniel Tiger, for example, if it's being shown on YouTube, it's being shown on a platform that uses a business model that collects data, that pushes recommendations that aren't necessarily appropriate for young children, and uses a lot of what we call persuasive design or manipulative design to push and pull our children to do different things or to stay on the platform longer. And so families are sort of being falsely marketed that some of these things are safe and necessary for their young children when they really aren't.
Actually, there was a question in the chat about messaging directly to parents, and I know that your polling you learned a little bit about that from your polling. Is there any other insight about the messaging to parents you want to share?
Yes, please. I think there's a lot of shame and guilt and worry around screen time. And so with our polling, we really hope to figure out how we can message to families without inciting this shame and guilt and kind of correctly placing the blame on the system at large, the tech companies that are really, again, carrying this narrative. So we tested a range of different messages and asked families if they were convincing reasons to reduce their children's screen time. And there were two sets of questions. One that was framed positively, so like, do this, your baby needs this, your child needs this. And the others were framed negatively. So don't do this because screen time is harmful. Both important messages. And when we asked these questions, we also measured their confidence in managing their children's screen time while they were being asked these things. What we found is that when families saw the positive messages first, their confidence increased or was maintained. And then when they saw the negative messages second, they were able to maintain their confidence level. But when they saw the negative messages, the don't do this messages first, their confidence dropped and stayed low even after they saw the positive messages. And, this shows us how we communicate with families around screen time, that it matters. And that if we talk first about what children need to thrive, like play, back and forth conversations, exploring the world with all of their senses first, then families will be more open to hearing about some of the harms. And, in the way that tech is kind of designed against what children need in many ways, not all tech, obviously. And they need to hear both. So we came up with a narrative framing that practitioners, educators, policymakers, et cetera, can use when messaging to families and can be used to create resources as well.
Great. I mean, so many of the answers you've all given are backed by research, even research you did yourself, and yet they're touching on something that's just so, it feels almost intuitive. We know how important humans are in helping children develop into happy people. And now we have lots of research to support that assertion. And I'm really glad that each of you came at it from a different angle. We're going to keep talking through some of these systems levels issues, but I'd like to invite all of our panelists back. So Rachel, Kathy, Dimitri, if you want to come back on camera to join the conversation and add any thoughts you might have. But to start with Michelle and Rachel, what are some of the systemic or structural changes that make it difficult for parents to follow expert guidance even when they want to?
I'm happy to jump in and then toss it to you, Michelle. So I mentioned this a bit earlier, but at Fair Play, we really see the business model of technology companies and other companies that market to kids as really central to the issue. And, the larger system is capitalism here. But what we see is that big tech feeds the business model feeds off of other systemic issues like childcare access, healthcare, education, even racism. Tech kind of over and over again has kind of posed itself as a babysitter or a teacher or an inclusive space, but it doesn't actually offer that solution in a way that really keeps kids safe and offers them the best possible option. And, you know, this is a systemic issue because we can give families all the advice in the world, but it's nearly impossible for them to win the battle against the powerful design and marketing of these products, especially when their children are young and vulnerable and still developing. And so we really see it as like not an individual sort of family or parenting issue, but a larger system at play that desperately needs regulation.
Michelle, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, well, I want to elevate something that's been mentioned. You know, it is a hard job to be a parent. Like and if you're juggling work and caregiving and financial stress, I mean, that's a lot to hold. So like the daily life pressures of just, you know, being able to hold all of that is, you know, is something we have to just name and know as we think about, you know, following expert guidance is like, where are they coming from? What's the context in which they're operating? I also want to elevate that I don't believe that all families have equal access to high quality programs, to information, to services due to financial or geographic or systemic inequities. And so that can lead to, a different view towards expert guidance because they may not even be accessing or receiving that guidance. One other thing that I'll elevate is that from a systemic standpoint, you know, health, education, social services are not always coordinated. So sometimes we're mixing messages and we have gaps in support as we think about parents, just because of how parents are supported in different areas of the country and different ecosystems. And then I will just name as we think about, who our families are and, you know, what they are coming from, you know, in addition to holding all the different responsibilities, you know, where are they coming from in terms of their own cultural and linguistic needs? Like, you know, where are they coming from when it comes to language, to cultural values, which might, again, make it harder in terms of a starting place, depending on where they're coming from, of how they've been exposed to guidance around technology or screens to begin with, which might again come from a broader lens of the community that they might be operating in most frequently.
Thank you for that. Rachel Barr, Kathy, Dimitri, do you want to weigh in before we move on to the last topic for today?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing. The policy around algorithms is one aspect that parents are fighting against, but parents are extremely stressed. And one other thing that we need to figure out policy-wise is how to invest in parents. And so across the globe, paid family leave is the rule, not the exception, which it is here. And studies have been done by Natalie Brito showing that paid leave has an outsized effect, particularly on low resource families. It reduces parent stress, it increases parent engagement, and it increases infant brain development. So if we really want to invest in parent time so that they can do all of these things that we are asking them to do to invest in their children's development, then paid leave, I think, is another policy we need to think about structurally.
Thank you for that. Great point. Any other?
Well, I would just add that I'm sorry, Michelle, you are so right. Man, parents, I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine trying to go through 750,000 apps to figure out which one is the right one I should show my kids or not show my kids. So power to all parents, honest to gosh. And Rachel, boy, do I agree. You know, we talk a lot about family policy. We say it everywhere. And yet we do nothing and have done nothing for decades. And whether that's around family leave or many other policies, even if we're talking about universal childcare, in this country, of the most industrialized countries in the world, we are dead last in what we offer parents and children. And I thank Rachel Franz for what you do, because somebody has to be out there like Common Sense and others to say, you know, here's like the Michelin guide to what you can use, because I would just be devastated right now with all the choices.
Dimitri, ready?
Oh, I'll yield my time. That's okay.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to come back to you in just a second. So we're going to shift gears again a bit and ask all of you to look forward. Tech continues to evolve at an increasingly rapid pace, and companies are always seeking to create the next best tech that will solve all of our biggest problems, whether that's learning or connection or mental health. Meanwhile, we're seeing more attention and action around making improvements to tech for the benefit of child safety and well-being. In just the last month, we've seen major announcements from Meta, YouTube, and OpenAI. And states like California have just passed new legislation just yesterday impacting age verification and AI tools to help protect children. And yet, many of these changes will have the most impact on older children and adolescents. And today we've been talking about our youngest children, babies and toddlers. So, I'm sure we can all take some, comfort in thinking that companies are starting to think a little bit about adolescent safety. But here we are, as Kathy pointed out, OpenAI has a very big new deal with Mattel. So we know that young children are definitely on the menu. As we look forward, the questions I'm going to ask you now are like, how are we going to keep up? How do we make sure these tools are designed to support child development or at least reduce potential risks? How does science and guidance keep up, both with the latest tech developments and the latest legislation? And how do we make sure that the relevant issues for young children are being addressed with the same level of importance as older children? So, Dimitri,
Yeah.
I want to start with you because I know you are swimming in these waters. You're looking at what's happening at policy and research and legislation, litigation. It's like there's so much at one time. What do you think is what's coming next? What do you think is going to happen with younger
Well,
children?
I mean, I think, to me, the simplest solution that I'll just put forward here is that, and it frankly touches on a lot of the points that other people have made, that you shouldn't be able to market something as educational unless you prove it. If we did that simple change, which presumably would be the Federal Trade Commission, I don't know how that policy is implemented, but that would make a huge difference. It would instantly mean that of the hundreds of thousands of apps, vanishingly few could make those claims, and the others, in the interest of competing with those that did, would have to, by force, partner with scientists, researchers to support an agenda to study their product so they could make those claims. That solves a lot of problems, including the one that there's a paucity of funding in this area and that the cycle time for research, the current cycle time for research, just can't possibly keep up with tech. I mean, for those of you in the audience that are non-scientists who might be looking to the scientists in this group to answer some of these questions, just a sort of quick primer on, the life cycle of a scientific idea from conception to research to publication, to securing funding, to doing research, to publication. If I have an idea today, a really good one, a really important one, before I can submit a credible grant to the National Institutes of Health, I have to have some amount of pilot data. That pilot data costs money, so I have to get the money to collect that pilot data. Then it takes time to collect that pilot data. So let's say that's a year or two. Then I submit a grant to the National Institutes of Health. That takes typically 2 cycles. That's another 2 years. Then I start to do the research. That takes 2 or 3 years, and then I publish it. You add all that together, and optimistically, if all of us today decided as scientists we were going to study the impact of AI on early childhood, the earliest federally funded research in that area would be 8 years from now. And we would be studying something that was already outdated.
Yeah.
So, I think that there has to be more flexible models. And one of the ways to do that is to force, and I want to emphasize force because they will not do it willingly, industry to collaborate with scientists at an arm's length, so that it's valid research. And as I said, the fastest way to do that is just to say you can't market something as educational if you haven't proven
Yeah, I
it.
love the simplicity of that. It's just so to the heart of the matter. I really appreciate that, Dimitri. Anybody else want to weigh in on the influences we're talking about and the speed with which guidance and legislation and technology are being deployed?
I do, because I'm kind of both in the policy world and in the research world. And I can say one moves at least a little bit faster than the other. So let me say that Dimitri is 1,000% correct. But people like Rachel and Dimitri, we have been, how many years have we been saying we would work with these companies? Just saying, a lot. Now, I could count on one hand how many companies, all right, I'm sorry, there was one, has called, to really significantly work with us beyond, let's say, the first conversation. And I think the misunderstanding is that scientists are so heady and somewhere hidden in the clouds, and they take so much time that they can't possibly get a product to market. But I think it's fair to say that with the collected knowledge that we already have, forget doing any more research, with the collected knowledge we already have, we could actually help developers get to where they want to get to in a more trustable way. Two, policymakers. If Germany can figure out how to put out more guardrails and Europe can have more guardrails on some of these products, why can't we? Full stop there. And next, I was only half kidding when I said I thought we should really come up with something like a consumer report that's quick and easy, like Rotten Tomatoes. It's either something that has been approved or it doesn't meet the criteria. Done deal.
Right on. I really appreciate that too.
Could
Um,
I just
I-
add one really quick, easy thing?
yes, Rachel, please.
Just delete YouTube and put PBS on the things as a rule of thumb for parents, because YouTube is automatically on people's phones, but just for parents who have so much other pressures, just delete that one and put PBS on would be a much easier way to choose the content.
And to underscore the point you and Kathy made, that these are typically, and Dimitri, shows that are scripted, created, and supported by child development experts for child development benefits. That is the purpose of those programs. And there's great research that shows that how effective those can be if viewed the way that you already recommended. So I really think that's another really smart, simple solution to trying to tune out some of what's coming at you that might not be high quality. I'm looking at the clock, but I know, Michelle, you have not weighed in as I recall. Okay.
Well, I'm just going to elevate one thing that has been mentioned a number of times. Technology cannot substitute or be a replacement for human interaction. It can be a supplement, it can be a support, but it cannot be a replacement. And so if we just start with that premise and hold that and make sure that we all embrace that, tech companies, policy leaders, systems leaders, and think of it again, the way that even when early technology was introduced into early learning programs or into the ecosystem of early learning and into child development, we wanted to just label it bad or good, and instead to think about like, how could it help, but also be very aware of the risks. I mean, we've elevated here some of the concerns and the real dangers of some of the conversations we've had about what technology has been promised to be able to do. But it can't be the relationship, and we need an adult being able to help support that, and we have to keep holding that as center and not let go of that.
I agree 100% with you too. All right, Rachel, Franz.
All right. Yeah, 100% agreement all around. I just really appreciate these perspectives. And, a little bit more of a complicated situation, which Kathy touched upon, is legislation. The US needs federal safety by design legislation. And that means that, you know, an app, a platform like YouTube would make children's well-being and privacy a priority. They would make the safest option the default. And what this would do is ensure that, you know, children aren't manipulated into staying on platforms longer than is healthy for them. You know, we see a lot of legislation conversations are centered around social media because of the endless scrolling and algorithmic recommendations and advertising practices. But those same exact practices are happening on apps marketed to toddlers and preschoolers. So we need this safety, a comprehensive safety by design legislation in order to take the burden off of families and hold companies accountable. Time and time again, they've shown that they are not going to regulate themselves.
You've all been highlighting various do's and don'ts in this conversation, and our early childhood guide includes a big list of big do's and don'ts for parents. What are your big do's and don'ts for parents, educators, and policymakers trying to make smart decisions about media for our youngest learners? We're going to go around, and I'm going to ask each of you to pick one, starting with Rachel Barr. A big do or a big don't for parents?
I think I want to start with, you know, parents know their children the best. They know what they like, what they don't like, what they're interested in, who their people are. And so I think my biggest takeaway is to trust themselves, like to trust themselves around sharing the world with their children and knowing that they really are the experts, and to apply that to media as well. What is it that the baby likes? What don't they like? Is it hard for them to move around away from media? So just thinking and using their knowledge as parents as they apply it to sleep time, to food time, to screen time, just thinking about what they know as the parent, as the expert about their own children.
Rachel France.
I love this question. I think when it comes down to it, centering children's development and what we know about how children thrive best across cultures, across identities, across contexts, will take us really far. I'm ready for a world that centers children and one where policymakers ensure that big tech doesn't interfere with that development. And I think if we are keeping in mind that development, again, it'll go a long way.
Michelle.
I'll bring it to the early childhood educators partnership and role with families. So my do would be families and educators should partner together on technology, and that you can trust the early childhood educators in your world to help provide guidance around healthy media, but also to partner on what that looks like between home and school.
Kathy.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to build on what Rachel said. I trust parents, so my do is parents, look at that app when your kid uses it for the first time and really see if it's what you intended it to be.
Dimitri.
Yeah, I'll say across the lifespan, for parents, be a good role model. Your children starting in infancy are watching how you interact with media. It's no surprise that toy cell phones are one of the most popular infant toy, and that's because even as infants, they see that parents value that device and they want one of their own. So, you know, recognize that every interaction you have with a screen is informing how your children will interact with screens, and take that seriously.
All such great advice. Thank you. We have some time left to answer a few more questions from the audience, so here we go. What is the role of connecting the first 5 years, the providers for children in their first 5 years to K-5 to help build a stronger transition over time as they build a foundational base during their early years? And are there any exemplars nationally or internationally that do this really well? Connecting the providers from the child's first 5 years of life to the K-5 part of their life. That's transition from early ed to primary or elementary ed. And are there any examples around the country or around the world that where they have figured out how to do that, build that foundational base? And if not, then the answer would be no.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here, Chris, and just say that I think that this is where part of our struggle in terms of the fragmentation of our systems, right? What early learning looks like and what the resources are available, what the system looks like for children 0 to 5 differs based on geography and areas of the country and even what the funding models look like. So I want to step back and just say that for all of us, we know that the science of early learning speaks to early childhood as being 0 to age 8. I think that there are examples where there has been intentionality of communities and schools really thinking intentionally about that language. But it's not even, it's not consistent. It is for us a continued challenge of how we continue to define that this is a continuum, that there isn't this cutoff at the infant, toddler, preschool, and then you start at kindergarten, but really thinking about those early years as learning begins immediately. And then how do we build on that continuum of early learning for children's success?
I'll just add
Right.
that Canada has a good model, Ontario, Canada. They've been working really, really hard at it. And I'm guessing it's about 10 or 12 years ago, they decided to make that transition explicit by having an early childhood person who knew the kids in the kindergarten and first grade classroom. So that transition now is quite smooth as the kids move from the early years into formal elementary.
And what'll be interesting is if digital literacy, media literacy is woven into curriculum from the earliest ages through 5th grade or 6th grade. I mean, we know that's really uneven too. We had an audience question, I think either Kathy or Rachel already responded to, but I'd like to open it back up for anyone to weigh in. Many parents use media to preoccupy their children rather than to connect with their children for a variety of reasons. Why is this a concern? And what would be realistic advice for families with high workload and tight schedules?
I think again, one thing, I'll just repeat what I said in the answer is basically there's a lot of pressure, and it doesn't have to be 120% for everything. So it can just be one word or one connection in the child's house that the parent sees, or they see that the child really loves fire stations, so on the show. And so when they're driving in the car, they say, oh, there's a fire station. That's where the real fire truck is. So it can be something, so it can be when they're in the car, they've noticed, they've quickly looked, they've seen that what their child is interested, they know their child, and then out in the world, they help their child connect the dots while they're moving around with them. Or they're sitting at the bus stop and they're playing a game, or reading an ebook, or I'm going to hand it over to Kathy now because she has all sorts of other things that people can do, sort of playing out in the world. So just making very small things, but they don't have to be 100% attention 100% of the time. That's a really unrealistic and unsustainable expectation for parents.
I just wanted to say, I had 3 kids. So somebody was running around all the time. And sometimes parents need a break. And it's kind of okay if they have a break on the TV or they have a break because they're watching a YouTube thing. I think, but the point is, we don't want to create couch potatoes. And we know that when we have kids who overuse the screens, then it shows up later in their later performance and in their later interactions with other human beings. So balance, balance, balance. And screens are here to stay, but I wouldn't use it as a babysitter. And Michelle already said it so beautifully, but I'm just going to re-say it. that there is no substitute for human-to-human interaction. You can supplement with screen time, but you can't substitute.
Many of you have talked about TV and the impact of TV, and it almost seems quaint to talk about TV, right? Because TV now is a screen that's really a monitor that's connected to the cloud that's downloading tech content into your home. It might be a big screen on the wall, it might be a little screen in your hand, right? These are, TV now is just, it's almost obsolete. But yet there was a significant amount of research on the impact of background TV. So some of you said technoference or phubbing is another term used to sort of when you prioritize a device over a person. What about this background noise of either the TV itself being on or you are on a device while someone's trying to interact with you? I think the audience might be interested in a little bit more of the research that can happen almost like secondhand, digital media use and the impact on the child. And Dimitri, I know we've talked about this a few times. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the background research on background television is that it's disruptive to interaction. It's disruptive to parent-child interactions. It's disruptive to adult-adult interactions. I mean, many of us can recall times prior to cell phones where if you were in a restaurant or a bar and you were talking with someone and there was a television on, it could be showing the most boring programming you've ever imagined, something that would be profoundly uninteresting to you. And yet it commands your attention. It's a medium that was built around doing that. And cell phones are that on steroids. I mean, they're designed to be addictive. They command your attention, and their physical presence alone is enough to distract you from being in the moment. What's interesting to me is that we haven't sort of evolved etiquette around that. I see some kids now doing it informally, which is to say that they make a point of putting their phones away or putting them where everyone can see them so that you can publicly shame implicitly someone for reaching for it. I kind of wish we had the same kind of etiquette rules that we had when I was growing up around your elbows at the table. I don't even know who started that stupid thing, but I was told you can't have your elbows on the table, it's rude. I don't know why that is to this day, but I don't do it. I did not make my kids not do it. But I wish someone had instilled in my children, which I guess would have been me, or in children of the next generation, equivalent rules of etiquette around the use of digital devices. And again, I want to come back to what I said about being a good role model. It starts with what you do as a parent. If your kid is talking to you and you're looking at your phone, you are not only being a bad role model, but you're very hypocritical when you try to tell them to focus on you and not look at their phone.
So
There's a-
we researched that, and we actually found that kids don't learn as well when they're with a two-legged screen watcher, which is what my grandson calls people who use their phone too much. The kids notice, and in a very, very recent study that we just ran, it was with adults. We now have a kid version that we're doing. When adults are watching, just observing a meeting, and one of the 4 participants pulls out a cell phone, and just glances at it and then puts it back. That simple. And then you do a measure of, would you trust this person and would you want to be friendly with this person? Whichever person had pulled out the cell phone got the lowest ratings of somebody who would be trusted or who you would want to be friends with. So just saying.
There's a couple of other things that sometimes people, so it does disrupt the interactions, but there's just a couple of other things. When the background TV is on, it's quite a cultural phenomena to the US. It's much higher in the US than many other countries. So about 30 to 40% of households have background television on all the time, even if nobody is watching. And it turns out that if anyone is in the room, the parent's attention is drawn to the screen, just as we said. But the thing that's probably more interesting is always what the baby is doing. And while the baby is trying to play, when, let's say you're trying to build a tower of blocks and it's a little bit unstable and you need just a little helping hand, right at that moment that the tower is about to topple, your caregiver's attention is drawn to the screen. So even though you could care less because it makes no sense as a baby what's on the screen, your play is actually being disrupted. You have less complex play. And so most of the time we don't think about that because the babies themselves are not watching that background screen. They're not necessarily paying attention to it or looking at it. But what they're doing is that their play is disrupted. And in fact, every time there's an interesting sound, like a ding or a sound effect or a car sound, their play is disrupted again because they look up to see what that ding is. Again, it's totally irrelevant to their lives, so they have to go back to their play. But it's like they're having to reorient 100 times or about every 15 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds when they're distracted away, and their play quality is really disrupted. So that is, I think, the really telling part, and that parents often are surprised because the baby's not paying attention. So why would it be disrupting their play? But it distracts them, and it stops their helpers from supporting them when they need to before the tower topples over.
Another great example of the importance of human interaction and how even a micro disruption to that interaction may have bigger ramifications or ripple effects on the child's overall development than you may even realize. So thank you for lifting those examples up and helping the audience understand the importance of staying focused. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you all for sharing your expertise and participating in this conversation today, and for all of the work that you do to help expand our knowledge or help apply the latest evidence to parenting, education, or advocacy to create a better online and offline world for all children. Thank you to everyone who joined us in the audience today, and for everyone who submitted the many great questions that kept our conversation going, for taking the time to learn more about this issue, and for all the work that you do to create optimal environments for children and their families. We all have a role to play in shaping a healthier childhood. We are honored to stand alongside these experts and dozens of other organizations leading critical efforts to restore a healthy ecosystem for children, and we invite you to join us. Don't forget to check out our new guide and stay tuned for more resources to support families in the modern digital age. To stay up to date on the latest research, events, and tools, check out our website, childrenandscreens.org, and subscribe to our newsletter. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to offer a few closing logistics.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, thank you, Chris, and your colleagues at Children and Screens, Kate Blocker in particular, for helping us to pull this amazing conversation together. Thank you to all of our panelists, to Rachel Barr, to Rachel Franz, to Dimitri Christakis, Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, and Michelle King. This has been such a thoughtful and rich and informative conversation. I mean, I wish that I had this conversation when my children were young, and I was trying to I cringe when I think about some screen time that I had with my kids when they were younger. And I just have to share, my husband still has a flip phone, so I wish that I was more like him, and then I was not distracted with when I'm engaging with our kids or adults in my life. But thank you all for this amazing conversation. And thank you to everybody who joined in. I think we had 30 questions in the Q&A box, so making it a really rich conversation, and our panelists were fabulous in writing answers and sharing responses verbally as well. I hope that you will continue to join us for more of our GLR Learning Tuesdays conversations through the month of October. And we've already got our first session in November lined up. Dropped the link in the chat, so I hope that you will register and make plans to join us for all of those. And thank you again.